Step back and we said, why do we need AI? That's where we actually started off with. We did a human to human experiment. If you take a step back, it's a very intuitive thing. You will not say, oh, is this form empathetic? Is this form helpful?
And even when you're applying AI, you should always keep the Occam's razor in mind, which is
Black box. But I'll give you an example. So we've kind of come up with a fairly innovative way of reducing the size of the prompt.
what are the most common misconceptions? How do you prioritize AI projects within your organization, within your team? Do you think explainability is going to be addressed?
It's a very interesting topic because since you raised this, what is human intelligence? Because I've had multiple discussions on this.
Do you think the path that we are currently taking, does it lead to AGI? Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pragmatic AI, a podcast where we try and talk to luminaries from the AI ecosystem globally and bring out the real stories from AI trenches. You must be wondering why another podcast with a focus on AI. The objective of this podcast is to bring realism to the AI narrative and cut the fluff and hype and build collectively a deeper understanding of what is possible, what is not possible. Our guests will include founders, VCs, leaders from AI, product and engineering teams, as well as folks from academia. These are people who have been building AI systems and ventures for last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, have seen multiple AI hype cycles. In short, these are people who have been there, done that. I'm your host, Anuj Gupta. I've had the fortune of working in AI for last 15 years. I've incubated and led AI efforts and built AI systems at both early stage startups as well as Fortune 50, leading to acquisitions and IPOs. I've led AI efforts at possibly one of the earliest startups to be funded purely for its AI vision back in 2013. Now, I run a company called Gradient Advisors, via which I help founders, VCs, CXOs navigate the AI journey efficiently. They take my help across the AI journey from AI strategy, vision, fundraising, right use cases, creating AI roadmaps, all the way to implementations, including data, modeling, productionizing AI ops, to GTM sales and even people aspects. I've helped a number of large organizations in setting up world-class AI center of excellence. I've also had the fortune of authoring a major book in AI, endorsed by top leaders coming from Carnegie Mellon, UCSD, DeepMind, Google AI, Microsoft Research, Spotify, Meta, Airbnb, and many more YC startups. The book is already translated in 5 languages with over 200 citations used by 50 plus universities globally for their AI curriculum. With this effort, I hope all of us can build a deeper understanding, and all of you will find value in this initiative. Hi, Som. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's bright and sunny in London, so all good. All good.
Great to see you, and absolutely honored to have you on our podcast. Let me introduce Som. So, all the AI that I've done in my journey, I've always believed that product people play a very, very critical role in designing good AI products. Tom is one of those very few people that I know of who are amazingly good at both product and the AI side, right? And that's the key reason of bringing in Som on this podcast. I and Som go a long way back, having a lot of candid conversation around AI. So, formally introducing Som. Som is a senior leader with almost 22 years of experience in enterprise and retail, digital AI products in the enterprise conversational AI space. That is his specialization. His products have spanned across telecom, financial services, healthcare, e-commerce, job domains. Right. For the past decade, he has built core ML and NLP products, including his own startups. as well as for the likes of NatWest, Amazon, and a couple of others. Most recently, he's trying to bake in Gen AI solutions for the Total Jobs Group, right? And that is where he heads the entire conversational products domain. Welcome to the
Thank
podcast,
you.
so.
That was a very kind introduction. No, appreciate it. I've always, yeah, we've known each other for years now. I've always enjoyed our discussion. So happy to be here, and thank you for having me. Yeah.
Okay, to start with, let us start with, can you give a broad sense of what you are currently working on?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it will be great if you can give us a flavor of some successful AI implementations as well as not so successful ones as well.
Sure. Sure. So yeah, I mean, probably makes sense to kind of give a quick context to what I'm doing. As you, I think, in your introduction mentioned, I've had a chance to kind of build conversational experiences or journeys um, for multiple domains. My own startup, we were mostly in the lead generation space. The work that we kind of did for NatWest was more in terms of regulatory compliance information, slightly in the HR space. What I'm currently doing in Stepstone or Total Jobs is we are in the job tech space. So we are essentially think of as a marketplace where enterprises advertise their jobs and candidates come and find their jobs. And one of the reasons why, and this I think is important as a learning for all AI practitioners, is we took a step back and we said, why do we need AI? Or are we fine with what we've got, or what is the need? What is the pain point that is being met? And when we took a step back, the realization is that if you look from a job hunter's point of view, it's a fairly emotional journey, right? It's very stressful. More often than not, you will basically you'll keep applying and then you will not get selected. It's that one in X number of times that you get selected. So it's a fairly stressful job. It's a very lonely activity, and from our perspective, the more you get to know the user, the better you can assist in terms of the search. So it's not just that I'm looking for a bottle of Coke. It's not a standard box standard piece. Every individual has a different set of requirement. And so that's where we actually started off with. We did a human to human experiment in terms of human chat, but we said, okay, does conversation work? Because if you think of it, and this is actually the power of conversational AI, you can build in the emotion in the product. If you take a step back, it's a very intuitive thing. You will not say, oh, is this form empathetic? Is this form helpful? But you can, when we measure our conversations, we measure saying, is this conversation empathetic? Is it natural? So we can. So what to circle back to your question, we started with a human to human chat. Then we actually were working with the KNN models, now obviously LLMs, but we are in the process of building the conversational experience for our job seekers, and obviously the recruiters as well, where we can first of all, build in the emotion. So be that guide, be that trusted mentor where there's an emotional investment even from the user. But also, the moment you're having a conversation, it leads to better data. And if this works when for the complex scenario. So if it's a standard piece where you can give me 3 data points and I can give you a great search result, you don't need a conversation. But if it turns out that you give me 3 data points and what you see is too generic or too high level, that's where a conversation comes in, because you can say, okay, what did you not like about this? Give me one more data. Are you looking for something more senior? Are you looking for some company you don't want to work in? So you get to have the conversation, and then based on that, you are now able to enhance that experience. So long story short, um, we are, and I think this will probably be true for most enterprises going forward. We are providing this conversational layer using Gen AI and LLM, um, so that we can understand the user better, and so therefore assist the user better, whilst building in that emotion as well, so that you're almost able to build that relationship and that stickiness. Because the user should want to have a conversation with you. It's not that it's a very functional thing. Now you have the ability to bring in that emotional investment as well. So two key aspects from an enterprise perspective. In terms of what has worked well, what hasn't, I'll actually talk about. It's not that it hasn't worked well. It's more about um, And I've made my fair share of mistakes, not over here, but in my previous implementations as well, because it's very, when you are excited about the technology and you get a chance to kind of, implement something, you don't tend to question yourself too much in terms of, okay, am I solving a real problem, and to what extent am I able to move the needle? Fact is, in any scenario, a conversation helps. The question is, are you able to move the needle enough to balance out the trade-off factors? And we'll talk about the trade-off factors, but it's not a straightforward thing. It's like you have to invest. I mean, AI comes at a cost as well. There is uncertainty to it as well. So there is a trade-off. So it's where it hasn't worked is where in the past instances where I've kind of been in front of implementations in different other use cases where yes, we were able to build a journey. Yes, our containment ratios were fairly good, but the size of the problem wasn't large enough to really move the needle. And so now I think what happens literally on a daily basis, if not at least weekly, is you have many people who are excited about, hey, can we see if we can bring in a conversation over here? And what actually happens is, so whether it's to do with maybe, someone who's basically trying to take a business process and, add a conversational element to it. And more often than not, the guidance that we give to our partner teams and to our colleagues and others is, see if there is a simpler way to do it. Why do you need a conversation? If it's like 3-step process, because people prefer click, click, click. A happy path is always preferred in terms of a click, click, click. If you can get through that, you do it. Only where the happy path hasn't worked, or by definition, you need to have a conversation saying you're preparing for an interview, or you're basically trying to kind of get to that second level of complexity of a search, that's where a conversation comes in. So where I'm giving you a slightly roundabout answer to the unsuccessful ones, but I think it's more of, it's not unsuccessful, it's the wrong application of the technology. It's not finding the right place to apply this technology. Technology by at the end of it is a means to an end. It's a question of choosing where you get it right, where you absolutely need it, which is where I said is basically the ambiguity, the uncertain quasi nature of the task to be done, versus if it's a straightforward piece, maybe not do a conversation, just do a straightforward implementation, traditional implementation. I don't know, did that answer the question?
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think you raised a couple of very good points, right? So one is that just because you're interacting with user, don't make everything conversational, right? It's only where you have to go back to the user to get finer details, right? And there is a to and fro that
Yeah.
might happen, right? That is where a conversational will do better than click, click, click. Still prefer click, click over a conversation as a
Yeah.
default mode,
Yeah.
right? Another very interesting point that you raised is that look at the size of the solve. So whether you build AI for 100 users or whether you build for 1,000 users or whether you build for 10,000 users, of course, scale will have its own engineering challenges, but a large part of the fundamental cost will be same.
Yeah.
But the kind of returns you will get on the smaller numbers will not be same as the kind of returns you will get on the larger numbers.
Exactly. Or it's basically the extent to which you're able to, even if it's 100 users, but if you're able to kind of, the magnitude of the changes by a factor of say 50, 60, it's like drastically different. Yes, you are getting your ROI. It is ultimately boils down to ROI. You're putting in the investment, it comes at a cost, there's a trial and error involved. Are you able to kind of bring in the kind of return, or is there a simpler way to do it?
Absolutely, absolutely, so. And another very interesting point I would like to bring out is that aspects like this often are not understood. And to be honest, it would be wrong to even expect a scientist to be able to understand these aspects.
Yeah.
Right. This is where I think the job of a product manager becomes all the more important. Right.
Yeah.
Because while you're building an AI, right, and while you're trying to take your product to the next level, but these are the kind of nuances that a product manager has to be sensitive,
Yeah.
and often are sensitive enough, right? Because these aspects will not be in the purview of a typical
Yeah,
scientist
and it's not.
part of it.
I mean, good news is most of the, at least the colleagues that I have, they obviously today everyone has a an element of a business sense, and am I why am I doing this? What is the purpose to it? But you're absolutely right. It's a question of the guardrails and the goal that has been set up. From a product perspective, what we talk about, even when we talk internally, we say it's LLM first, but not LLM only, because even in the conversation space, you might not need an LLM everywhere. LLM by definition, there's a stochastic nature to it. They're undeterministic, right? You cannot always with certainty, you can never with certainty predict what it is going to say exactly. Now, this becomes a problem if you need to kind of provide, say, for a regulatory purpose, you need to provide a boilerplate templated result, answer every time. You might not want to use an LLM over there. You might want to, at that point of time, get the intent, use a rule engine, provide that, or you might want to use a KNN over there, right? So that's the thing. It's even, and this is true for AI as well. It could be AI first because it enhances the experience, but it's not AI only. You decide the problem you're trying to solve, and then choose the technology. AI or otherwise is a means to an end.
Absolutely, absolutely, so right. So I always tell in my teams, one, AI should be the last resort. If you can solve a problem without AI, nothing like it. Absolutely nothing like it. Go for it only as a last resort. And even when you're applying AI, you should always keep the Occam's razor in mind, which is simpler is
Absolutely.
better,
Absolutely.
right? If you
Yeah.
can get a job done from a regex or a bunch of rules or a logistic regression, nothing like it.
Yeah.
No need to bring in the LLM, right? You should bring in the bigger machinery, the bigger firepower, only when everything else is failing. And that again have to be the last resort, even within that.
Yeah. I think you alluded to one of the core principles I think that everyone should be following in any product being built, which is the Occam's razor, where it's basically go for the simplest, least number of assumptions based solution, especially when you're starting off, right? Because otherwise you are adding too many complexities, and if things don't go the way you want it to go, you've either set the wrong expectations or you don't know how to do the root cause. So go with the simplest approach first, gradually bring in the complexity.
Right. And that also means that you will have to do a lot of experimentation
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
start from the simpler, you gradually keep on increasing the complexity until you get to the goal. You
Yeah.
can't
And
just
this,
say I'll use the LLM as a first approach
no,
and then
cannot.
stop over there.
And this is probably also where it's one of the things where most people have to realize, and as product managers you have to realize, building an AI product is different from building a typical software product, because a software product can be estimated. It is known now, it can be estimated because we've lived through it for decades, right? So we have a fairly good sense. Okay, if you have to build this thing, so many story points, da 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 da, predictability is there. If you are again using an LLM from an endpoint perspective, to some extent the certainty is there because again it's a black box. But I'll give you an example. So we've kind of come up with a fairly innovative way of reducing the size of the prompt, which is the instructions that you give to the LLM, mainly because we wanted to reduce the latency, reduce the cost. Tokens cost a lot. Also, we wanted to improve its accuracy because longer prompts actually lead to a lot of confusion. So we said, okay, let's try and make this as compact as possible. So we said we come up with something called dynamic prompt assembly, where you on the fly understand what the intent is. You kind of you compose the prompt at runtime, and you're
Mm-hmm.
basically then kind of sending out only the most optimized prompt to the LLM.
Sure.
Now, this it took us at least from an iteration perspective, it took us around 12 iterations to get it to the right level of accuracy. Why? Because we are trying out something new. This is going to be the case for most of the places where you're trying out something new, especially in the AI space. So you cannot with a high degree say, hey, we're going to do 3 iterations and we'll get this right, and so therefore you commit to those milestones. You have to almost, when you are experimenting with these kind of things, you have to have a plan A and a plan B from a product perspective. Get to the business outcome with the most simple, less complicated piece. Might not be the most optimized, deliver the business outcome. In parallel, have this experimentation path running, And then once you have this running, suddenly you're able to get your 3x, 4x benefit that you decided on why you wanted to kind of do this. So that's another where typical software products or product managers approach for a typical software product should vary from an AI perspective. There is an element of uncertainty. Those expectations need to be set with the stakeholders as well.
Absolutely. Right. And what you're saying here is get to the V0, launch it, right? While that is taking its own life, start working on the experimentation part, right?
Exactly.
Where you're trying to now get to the V1 or the V2 and so on and so forth.
Yeah, because
Right?
there is no certainty that your V0 is going to be quick and it's going to do exactly what you want to do it. It's a question of getting the model right. Even if and especially so if you're trying to fine tune a model, you don't know what is going to happen. So yeah, de-risk.
Absolutely. Great point. So as part of this journey, Som, right, what have been some of your key challenges and how have you, overcome those challenges?
Okay. I'll break it down into the let's say the technology related pieces, which frankly were easier, and then the user and the stakeholder related, which are more difficult. So from a typical perspective, we obviously were working with the transformer based solutions even before ChatGPT happened. So we had some sense of it, but now obviously it's now mainstream. But again, take a step back. The point that I made earlier with an LLM, especially if you're talking, a ChatGPT works because hey, the amount of risk and liability, etc., that they have is very relatively less. Now, if you as an enterprise are putting a solution out there and you're representing other enterprises, the amount of accuracy that you need is fairly high in terms of the responses. So you cannot have hallucination, you cannot have bias, you cannot have toxicity. You have to basically make sure that from when the agent is actually responding to a question, it is representing what the end enterprises wanted accurately. So technical solutions or build related solutions in terms of hallucination was a key problem. um, we've sidestepped that using things like obviously fairly strong guardrails. Guided using the examples, dynamic and static examples. So we've kind of got our hallucinations down, but that was one major thing that we started off with. Bias, toxicity, other aspects as well. You don't And in this case, most of the time, the model is not biased. But what you're trying to do is the user might actually ask a biased question. Is this job good for an Asian male? You don't want to reinforce that bias. So it needs to know that, it needs to recognize the bias and sidestep it, and then effectively do that. Toxicity, frankly, depends upon overall quality, etc., etc. Not a real problem, and I think toxicity detection is there. But we've been very conscious about this from an implementation perspective right from the start. We actually have 3-4 layers of where it's basically real. Obviously, you're preventing it through your mechanisms. Real time, you're detecting it. Then we actually have a model for the transcript analysis, and then we have the human audit. So we've been very focused on the compliance and these aspects. Probably rightly so, because now the EUA Act is also in force. Latency has been a problem up until very recently. That's why one of the first use cases we started off was on WhatsApp, because WhatsApp by definition is asynchronous. So it was less of a problem.
Okay.
That's WhatsApp. But latency has been, for at least what we've seen in terms of the endpoints from the models that we're using, definitely way higher than what you would expect in a typical web setup. But now with GPT-4 Omni, obviously latency is less of a problem. Cost also now less of a problem. GPT-4 Omni is, I think a factor of 6 or 7 lower than what GPT 3 or GPT-4 was at some point. Now prices have been falling. I think it's going to keep falling more, because now obviously you have the likes of Llama 3.1 and other equally good open source models coming in. But in terms of from a technology perspective, in the interest of time, so there are a number of things that you have to take care of, which you would not. So these are the additional things to take care of compared to building a typical software piece. So these are some challenges to overcome. But I'll tell you, my biggest challenge, and I think this is going to be true for everyone, is overcoming the user perception. The users have been used to chatbots of the yesteryears, which were not really smart. They do not trust the bot to be able to handle complex scenarios. I saw this, 4 years back with when we were doing with NatWest as well. I'm seeing this now. The user education and getting the user to actually understand what all the assistant is capable of, and to the extent to which it can be helpful, I think is a big challenge that we are trying to do it. So user education, and then to a lesser extent in my case, but I keep talking to my colleagues in the industry, there's an element of the stakeholder management as well. In my case, I've been fairly lucky. Most of my stakeholders come, with a fairly good understanding of what AI is capable of and what it should be. But I've seen many scenarios where, again, going back to the yesteryears, oh, we can't start off because we don't have labeled data. Might not be the case over here. Pick your use case. You might actually have a fairly large pre-trained model which does not need labeled data to start off and do your V0. Get your user uptake. Get a sense of, is this a product market fit possible? Then invest in terms of the labeled data part of it. So there's an element of a stakeholder management, which is less of a problem. There's an element of typical implementation with the stochastic models, etc., which is another problem. But I think from a product perspective, in my mind, the biggest challenge is to kind of get the user educated and build that equation with the user so that they are able to use the agents to the maximum possible. Even for me, it took a while before I got to the using ChatGPT to its full extent. I used to ask questions. Now I don't use Google for any kind of search. I will go to ChatGPT because it gives me a context, it gives me a full information. So I think user education is the biggest challenge from my perspective.
No, that's a great point, right? And I've also built products, right, where we realize that how you introduce a AI product to your users, right? That strategy has often had more bearing as opposed to the quality of the model,
Yeah.
right? You can still build the greatest AI system, but if you have not introduced it in the right way, if you have not set the right expectations with the user, things can grossly go wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially where the users have had the experience of the previous technology, they've almost level set themselves saying, oh, this is what I will use this for. To overcome and to retrain that behavior, I think is, in my mind, the biggest product challenge.
Absolutely, right? Because this is a step change for everyone, right? And not just for the builders, not just for the industry, but also for the users, right?
Yeah.
And I think another very good point that you made, right, is that so in my humble opinion, the biggest change the chat GPTs of the world and this last 18 months, whatever we have seen, is that to launch a V0 today, you don't necessarily need a AI team, right?
Spot
A
on.
very smart business leader, a very smart product leader, and a bunch of so-called enthusiasts or engineers who can do enough of prompt engineering can actually hack together a V0 in 2 days to 2 weeks of time,
Yeah.
and you can take it to the market,
Yeah.
right? So, and the whole reason is because for majority of the problem, the off-the-shelf intelligence. So actually call GPTs and the LLMs as off-the-shelf intelligence. The off-the-shelf intelligence is good enough that you can plug and actually play, go to the market and do all of the stuff, right?
Yeah. I'm
The
with you.
real challenge of the data, that specifically the data, is if your product finds success and then you have to take it to the next level, to the V1s and the V2s and the V3s, that is where you will have to go back to the older world where you need to collect a lot of high quality data, you need to train a lot of stuff from ground zero and so forth.
Yeah.
And I think that is what is essentially playing out in the startup world today.
Yeah.
A lot of startups raised a lot of money very quickly when this whole thing started, and they were all built on top of the APIs of the GPTs and the LLMs and so on and so forth, right? Or the open source world.
Yeah.
But for these organizations, right, they have to go above and beyond,
Yeah.
right? And they did not think enough of the data and the other aspects. So this is almost like a parallel track you have to set, right?
Yeah.
Uh, which you did not do in time, and now you are paying a cost to it.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this is not that widely understood, but again, I keep reinforcing in any discussion I have is if your path is towards the product market fit, you don't. It has become a lot easier now. You can put something out there, get your data, do this.
Yes.
Only when you're almost getting to the point where you want to create a moat, because anyone can take a GPT-4 or a 4 Omni or whatever it is, or Llama 3 and put it with some amount of effort, a similar solution can be created. Where
Yes.
you actually want to use your own proprietary data, where you need to have a fine-tuned model to create that distinction, to create that moat, that is where you are entering the realm of data science. But your time to market has become a lot. Leverage the large models. They have a wide spans. They can more or less basically handle a very decent, you know, the, the customer satisfaction numbers that we are seeing without going into the details is significantly higher. I mean, compared to any of the web journeys, it's significantly higher. So a plus one. In the interest of time, absolutely, I would say plus one to what you mentioned. Product market fit. Start off with off the shelf intelligence, as you call it. Once you are there, once you're basically trying to kind of do this, and fact is this, what this will do is this will generate the kind of data that you need to then start fine-tuning your models. You might not have access to this kind of data, so it solves the chicken and egg problem as well.
Yes, yes. And the whole point of V0 should not be to build a great model. The whole point of V0 is to figure out, are we even building the right thing? I mean,
It's a
that
product
should be
market
the
fit.
central question.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's your path towards product market fit. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. In the interest of time, right? What are the most common misconceptions you have come across in your work?
I think this would be, I mean, we talked about it. This would be one big thing in terms of the stakeholders. Again, is I've seen this. Many of my colleagues in the industry blocked or basically facing this thing where saying, okay, so you want to do. So there are two extremes. One is let's sprinkle AI here, because we basically also need to kind of catch up. And I think that's one problem in terms of AI is not an answer to every solution, not every
Yeah,
complex problem. Not so. This is the thing. I think the perception is if it's complex, give it to an AI, and it'll basically solve it. No, it's a question of the nature. It's again a means to an end. So if there is a complex problem, yes, AI might have a part to play in that, but it's a question of AI is again a means to an end. So not every complex problem has an AI solution. There could be simpler, easier, cheaper solutions. So that's one. And the second is this getting started problem where you might basically, there are many users who are basically saying, or, I've heard of stories where it's like, oh, we are blocked because, we don't have labeled data. And then if you take a few steps back and you say, okay, why do you need this? Based on your journey, you take any of these models, you can actually put a first version out there and you can start generating your data or at least see whether you really are solving a problem. So I would say misconception wise, these would probably be the two large things that stand out at the moment for me. Yeah.
very interesting. So I think somebody had mentioned this, that AI is the new Mayo, where people are putting it anywhere and
Yeah.
everywhere, right?
You
And
Anuj,
that's not the way, right?
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to speak of you, but uh, Anuj, we've seen this. This happens with every new technology. There's something new comes out. You will initially see a very low uptake, then you'll see an excess of it, and then will initially see a very low uptake, then you'll see an excess of it, and then there's going to be rationalization that happens.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. There is a hype, and then there is a down path, and then
yeah,
somewhere you stabilize it.
yeah,
But I think with AI, it's a lot more because of the very potential it has. The FOMO is high,
yeah,
and because of which everybody wants to, like. I mean, the fact that today OpenAI, I mean, the last valuation was what, $85 billion,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
In a
yeah.
couple of years, somebody could create a company like this, right? Uh, I won't say overnight success. Clearly, it's not. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I
No,
mean, one of the things that I have personally seen a lot from is that a lot of senior leadership, right? So people at the very top, they still don't understand the fact that AI system will make mistakes. So when a product is about to be released, right? I've often seen some CXO will come, try, give 5, 10 examples of or 5, 10 trials of their own as inputs. And if those 5 to 10 trials come out great, then it's a great product. If a fraction of those 5 to 10 inputs don't necessarily yield the desired results, they kind of get freaked out.
Yeah.
And when an AI team tells them, hey, this is kind of say 85% or 87% or 90% or 92%, somewhere anything less than 95% is seen as a cardinal sin.
Yeah.
Have you faced this and how do you deal with this?
Yeah, that's true as well. So I think it's a question of, again, you have to realize your AI is a means to an end. So this is going to be true. It's a question of, so when we are testing our conversations as well, we do two sets of testing. One is, because we have a very experienced, a team of conversational analysts, they have a sense of what the typical user would ask because they kind of do regular audits, they understand the tone. So we would kind of do almost like, uh, you know, the large part of the bell curve kind of a test in terms of, does this pass? And then what we do is basically almost stress testing, where you are trying to push it to the extremes. You do not expect your user to actually ask those questions, but you're trying to kind of get a sense of the edge cases of the model in terms of at what point does it break. What happens in these scenarios, and this reminds me of a few scenarios when, this was in my startup, again, in front of some CIO, and they will come and just to test the model in terms of how intelligent it is, they will ask an extremely random question which none of their users would ask on a usual scenario. And if it is able to answer that, it's fine. If not, it's like it's not proven the asset test. Again, AI is not an answer to every question. It's a means to an end. So I think, again, this is again maybe a shout out to all the product professionals in terms of when you're setting the expectations or even when you're running the test, just like any other technology, just like a form cannot, a Google search bar cannot, do something which, some other product can do. It's basically, it's meant for a particular purpose. It will get it right, say 95, 98% of the time. There will be 2% of the time when it is going to be an edge case. So your tolerance for some of the edge case scenarios has to be understood. But as long as when you're testing what it is meant to do, you get your guardrails right, you're compliant from a overall perspective, I think you're fine. So just to summarize, yes, it's a question of don't sweat the edge cases. Focus on the main business use case, focus on the main value that you're generating, and if you're able to generate that value, use AI. Otherwise, AI will not, like any other human or any other technology, will not be right 100% of the time. It can never be the case. It's always probability.
Great point. How do you prioritize AI projects within your organization, within your team?
It's
Because I'm sure every project,
yeah.
the ask would be to take them or make it AI first.
Yeah, I think I circle back to the point that we were talking about earlier in the conversation. You don't start off with this is an AI product. You start off with, is this a product? What are the business metrics? What are the North Star metrics, needles that you're trying to move on this one? And then you see if AI is the best way to do this. So hypothetically, say if you're trying to build a product where someone's applied for a job or they've not heard back, an emotional element is high. Yes, maybe a form might not work, or a simple one single line might not work. Maybe a conversation at that point of time helps. That's where you basically want to bring in an LLM because it has that naturalness to it. So then you say, okay, I need a product which has a high naturalness, high empathy, and so therefore the emotional element of the CSAT, the needle will move, and so therefore I will use AI over here. But if you're basically saying, okay, give me these 3 data points which are very well defined, and and if you get those 3 data points, your North Star, your the KRs for the objective that you're trying to build will be met, you don't use AI. That's one. So basically start off with the business problem that you're trying to solve. And then second is what we talked about is in terms of the extent to which the needle can be moved. So yes, you will be able to move the needle, but is it good enough? And are you getting the ROI? Because again, keep in mind, people miss this. Yes, the costs have come down drastically over here, but there's an additional element of, upkeep as well. You have to, the AI product starts off after it is launched because there will be data drift. There will be concept drift. Data in terms of what it was previously trained on will move. The business, the user behavior will move. So concept drift is there. You have to continuously invest in the auditing of that particular model as well. So there is a fair amount of investment. Account for that. See if you're getting the ROI. If you're getting the ROI, go for it. If you're not, find a simpler solution or find a better way to improve the ROI. So
Absolutely.
short answer is, how do we prioritize? Just like any other product. And then we basically see if AI can be brought in, then yes, otherwise we don't.
Yeah. So I think if I can summarize, right, one, fall in love with the problem, not with the fact that you are applying AI here.
Yeah.
Right. If the problem organically demands, it shows all those signs, right, that AI is needed, of course, go ahead and use
Yeah.
it. It's a very, very powerful and a potent tool. But at the end of the day, it is just another tool. Right.
Spot on.
That's one point, right? And second, what you're saying is that while building of all of this has come down drastically, and hopefully this will come down even cheaper, the tech debt that comes, right? And a lot of people are yet, a large part of the workforce that have started to use AI recently because of the last 18 months haven't still seen how things shape when you're building the V2s, the V5, the V7s of the system.
Yeah.
The concepts like the drift, right? The data drift, concept drift, technical debt it brings, and other kind of challenges it will bring. The cost of maintaining these systems is very high.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that comes back to bite you very badly if you have not made the right choices initially.
Yeah.
Right. So again, first principle thinking is key, all the more important.
Yeah.
With a very powerful and a potent tool like AI.
Yeah. Spot on. I completely agree. Completely agree.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Great. We have all seen, right? I mean, last 18 odd months, or rather, I should say, starting from November of 2022, when GPT came,
Yeah.
to now, it has been an absolute bonkers ride, right? For everyone, the new people who saw, the people who were already there did not believe.
Yeah.
Researchers are struggling with the fact that there are 1,000 papers getting published daily.
Yeah.
How do I even keep track of something? Forget about being able to do, right? Among all of this, right, what excites you the most and what worries you the most?
It's a great question, but I do, since you raise a point which I think is very relevant from a product perspective as well, because it comes into this thing. The last point that you mentioned, new research, new papers, new models coming out. How do I keep account for it? That's where your product thinking has to go in. You have to build your product keeping in mind that the model that you're building the product with today, in literally 3 months' time, will be outdated. So you have to go down the approach of a modular approach. You have to account for this change. It's a given fact. So AI product managers, when you're working on this, account for the fact that you're not going to just always end up using a 4 Omni. I mean, for us, basically, literally in the past 3 months, we've kind of swapped. We've done 3 model jumps because there is basically, a newer model that comes out. So account for that fact when you're designing the product. But in terms of the question that you raised, I mean, yeah, I mean, think of it. Has it just been 18 months that the world has changed? But so much has changed in the 18 months. But what I'm excited about is, I think, a couple of things, and then I'll talk about the things which, not worried, but I think which are challenges as well. The fact that we are now seeing, and this was true from a compute perspective as well, even in terms of, from a networks perspective, we are, I think, seeing the emergence of edge AI coming in, smaller models being available on the peripherals. I think a great positive from the perspective of, even from a privacy perspective, you're kind of controlling your data. You're still getting the benefit of AI, but you're still able to kind of hold on to your own data. So I think And I think that you'll see a lot more innovations happening from that perspective in terms of, again, it becomes more real the moment it becomes an edge. AI part of it, your consumer goods, other aspects of it becomes useful. So I think edge AI, great. We've seen suddenly, I think, I would say, I now don't even know, it's probably 6 months, 18 months, or 8 months, the fact that there's an emergence of multimodal part of it. I think experiences are becoming multimodal. Great news for product people, great news for users, because now you're able to bring in all those other aspects. You will not be, if I type a sentence to you, you will not be able to get the emotion. If I'm able to hear you speak, or if you're able to hear me speak, the emotion element kind of comes in. You're able to see my expression. So the fact that now multimodal is within grasp and definitely, up to the mark, is again a big positive. Multilingual, again, another positive, not really explored that much, but I think especially for people who are trying to kind of build sticky products or build products where you almost need to kind of get the user to, engage and pull them into it. Language, as we know it, is going to be, I think, a big positive for us. The fact that costs have dropped, again, from a practical perspective, is a huge positive. So a number of things that I'm excited about in the last, I would say, 3 6 months that have happened. Obviously, the world has changed, but this is what excites me. What worries me a little bit, a number of factors. The first being, again, yes, we are using. So if we use, React agents, so you can almost peer through in terms of what it did or why it kind of did it. But the explainability of the models to a great extent still remains a black box for us, which again becomes a bit of a problem for when you are trying to, get to that, a certainty from an enterprise perspective. That becomes a little bit of a concern. Bring in the element of the regulatory uncertainty. We have the EU AI Act out now. We know what's happening in the US in terms of a different, legislation battle as well. So this uncertainty in the regulatory environment does pose a little bit of a, shadow from that perspective. Um, the larger piece, and this is where we're kind of going into a slightly philosophical world, and maybe this is a controversial thing as well, but this probably again happens with all technology, is when calculators came out, it was a thing. It went in terms of, okay, or computers came out, it was like we will lose jobs, or there was a backlash around it. But what happens is it got worse before it got better. I think we're going to have the same thing happen with the AI as well. But my problem is we've not, or maybe our problem, or maybe with the regulatory thing, it becomes more of a real scenario, is that we are almost hurdling towards it without knowing how we will react to it. The pre-thinking that is needed in terms of, oh, these are the places where this happens, or if this happens, this is how we retrain people, or we basically do that. That thinking probably needs to happen. So I would say, if I was to summarize, I would say the explainability of the models. See, there are other practical things, latency, cost, the bias built into the models, etc., which we can again sidestep. From a ask perspective, I think more explainability in the models. From a wider perspective, in terms of ecosystem perspective, the regulatory uncertainty or not entirely understood regulations is a bit of a concern from a product person's perspective. And then there is obviously the larger piece in terms of, should we do this? And if we are doing this and we know that this will happen, how are we going to react to it? Which I think is a
Very
wider
interesting.
industry problem.
Very interesting. But I mean, just spending just a quick minute, but do you think explainability is going to be addressed? Because deep down, all of this is a correlation game
Yes.
rather than a causation game, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there is a reason why they are called stochastic parrots. We all
Yeah.
understand, right? They
Yeah.
have crammed everything. There is
Yeah.
no line of reasoning. We have seen these interesting scenarios where at one end they have got silver medal in mathematics olympiad, but at the same time they can't explain between 9.1 and 9.9 which is bigger,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, do you think explainability is even possible? Because all of this is just cramming up, right? This is just cramming up.
Yeah, so I know that it's the answer as we know it today, um, is no, absolutely. Um, but that's within the confines of what we know today. Reason why I'm talking about things like explainability being important. So this is more of an ask rather than,
Yeah, yeah,
this thing,
sure.
is because especially in a regulatory environment where you have to meet certain things, you want to have as much explainability as possible to be able to be compliant, even from an enterprise perspective. See,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
I'm building something for one-to-one for my particular use, I don't need explainability. But if I'm liable for certain things, etc.,
yeah,
I need that. So that's more of an ask. But here's my point to it again. You don't need explainability in everything. Just like you will never have zero hallucination, but you have to figure out what kind of hallucinations are acceptable and what kinds are no. And you basically then bear down on those use cases and get them down to as low as possible, and then have as many guardrails as possible so that you're able to quickly correct and check this problem. Again, if you take a step back, you and I speak certain way, we try and do this thing explainable. There is no 100% explainability for any intelligence system on the face of this earth. It's a question of
yeah,
where do you need it to be explainable, where do you not.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I would have loved to even address a question like whatever we have seen in last 18 months, is this even intelligence or not? But maybe a separate discussion altogether on that,
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
Uh,
that's a very interesting topic because since since you raised this, what is human intelligence? Because I've had multiple discussions on this. But if you think of it, and maybe this is a very controversial thought, but if you see, we are also machines. We are programmed machines. Our code sits in our DNA. We've had our element of reinforcement learning over decades and over centuries and millennia, and we are biochemical setups which follow a coded DNA pattern. So there is a parallel over there. There's a parallel over there in with robots and machines as well. But I don't know.
uh,
Maybe
to be
that's another
honest,
long discussion.
I have a different opinion, but I think if we start that, we need a separate
that's
podcast
going to
on it
take that's going to
altogether,
take three
right?
months.
Uh,
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just use this as an opportunity. Do you think the path that we are currently taking, does it lead to AGI?
Okay.
Right? I know. I mean, I'm asking you to crystal ball
Yeah.
about a topic which itself is all about predictions, right? So it's almost like the
Yeah.
inception of predictions, right?
Yeah.
But what's your broad sense?
Okay, I will answer it differently. I think it's a question of, do we need AGI is the question. Should we go down the AGI route? Because it's again, if there is a problem statement which requires an AGI system, you will find a way to do it. In my mind, I think, and this is probably where it is going in, is you will almost have specialist setups, and that's the path to follow. You go down a specialist setups, and maybe an ensemble of specialist setups gets you to some kind of a AGI setup. So in my mind, will we get to an AGI is probably not the right question to ask. It's a question of, do we need to get to AGI? In my mind, the answer is no. In my mind, the focus as of now should be kind of almost getting to this really large, maybe vertical centric, use case centric specialist setups, because it's
Hmm.
these kind of promises on AGI which kind of then push you. We were discussing this earlier, Anuj, in terms of that the AI winters start happening when these kind of things become the promises saying, hey, we're going to get to AGI, and then it doesn't happen, and that's when you kind of get to those pieces. So
Hmm.
I think so. If you ask me, and this is, I have no rational answer for this, we will get to AGI, but I don't think we are anywhere close to it. I don't think we need to be anywhere close to it. If you're being rational about the use of AI, the focus has to be on specialist systems. And then subsequently, there might
Yeah,
be a entirely different architecture that gets us to AGI, or it could be a different approach to it. But yes, I think progress as we know it will happen. So AGI at some point will happen, not anytime soon.
yeah. But I would say, some that's more of a product guy's way of looking at things, right? what I need in order to take my product to the next level.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there is always some entrepreneur, some scientist out there, some VC out there that wants to get to AGI, because then
It
what it
depends.
opens up is a
Yeah,
different beast altogether.
but it also depends upon what you define as AGI. That's my problem.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
it's a very nebulous thing. You and I are not AGI. We also are not AGI, but we are also not general intelligence, because we can't talk intelligently about everything. We have a basic reaction part of it. So it's again a question of how you define it. But
Yeah,
anyways,
right. I mean, that's a separate discussion, right? But in my humble opinion, what what is another very beautiful aspect of last 18 months has been that even by cramming, you can solve a lot of problems
yeah,
for which earlier only the intelligence was seen as a path. I
yeah,
don't know whether this is intelligence or not. That's a separate question, right? But what I'm saying is, for every question, we don't need to be intelligent enough by
yeah.
cramming, and right. And we have seen this in exams also, right? If you cram enough, right? So what we are saying is, you may not be intelligent, but if you do enough hard work, if you cram enough, if you can cram the entire internet as it has been done in this case,
You
you
might.
can go very far, right?
Yeah,
And I think that is something nobody had seen, right?
yeah, yeah. I
So
mean,
that is a fascinating part of this
yeah.
18 months. Another thing.
I'm smiling because it seems like you're basically saying we might not need more intelligent model. We need more hardworking AI models, which can basically pick up a lot more information, and then the
Right?
intelligence
And
comes in as a
correct, and
consequence. So, yeah,
that is
why not?
the whole part of
That's the
compute and
entire
data,
idea of
right?
large models. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you have enough data and enough compute, you can still get very far in the race. You might
See,
not get to AGI. I mean, that's a separate field altogether. But a lot of FAQs can be answered. A lot of common questions can be answered. A lot of fairly smart products, if not intelligent products, can be built.
yeah, but I mean, I don't know how much time we have, but since you talk about it, ultimately it's a function of the data and being able to see patterns to the data. The more you know, the more easily you will be able to kind of get to patterns, which is kind of the at least one aspect of intelligence. So being more knowledgeable lends you an element of intelligence, because now you are able to see patterns and therefore extrapolate, and therefore you're better prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. But the point, I mean, the result that came just last week, right? You go and tell anybody that I've cracked silver medal in maths Olympiad,
Yeah,
you will be labeled intelligent,
yeah,
right? You will be labeled among maybe zero point 0.1 or maybe among 0.01% of that people,
yeah,
right? Now, here what you're saying is, no, if you cram enough of historical data, right? And in this case, of course, it also had access to an external engine and stuff like that, right? With that, also, you can get very far, right? I find that as the most interesting proposition. But uh, in the interest of time, if you were to give one advice to AI product practitioners, right, and this is something that you have done for ages, right, what would that be?
I would say, again, I will go back to what I mentioned earlier. It's AI first, but not AI only. AI is a means to an end. You need to, as an AI product manager, you need to be aware of the capability. You need to have a sense of where do you need a higher recall versus a higher precision. So you need to be aware of the trade-offs from an AI perspective, so that you can guide your team better. But um, don't start off by thinking they are going to build an AI product. Start off by thinking, just like any other case, you're going to be able to build a great product that solves a user problem, that solves a business problem, and then see where does AI make your life easier, and are you getting the ROI. If you start off by thinking I'm going to build an AI product, I mean, again, there's no certainty or this thing, but more often than not, you will find that it is taking longer than you think you needed, and it's going to cost you a lot more, because you're putting the cart before the horse, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think what you're saying is that as a product leader, as a product manager, or no matter what role you're playing in a product team, one, you need to expand your toolkit, right? You can't just run with the toolkit that you were running 2, 3, 4 years past. You now have some very powerful tools available, and you
Yeah,
must know how to work with them. But at the same time, you must realize that if it's a nail, you still need a hammer.
yeah,
If it's a
yeah,
screw, you still need a screwdriver.
yeah,
Just because you have this ultra powerful tool, don't just go on hammering AI left, right, and center in your product,
yeah.
right? Uh, be
Pradhan.
fully aware of its strengths, weaknesses, when to use, when not to use, or stuff like that, right?
Exactly that. You don't need to be a data scientist. You don't need to say, I'm going to here, you need an XGBoost model. It's great if you have that insight because it just makes the process that much easier and you're faster in your communication. But you need to know why you're building it and you need to know your trade-offs. For that, you need the basic knowledge.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, that's a great advice. As always, so it's been a pleasure talking to you,
Likewise.
uh,
Right.
bringing your almost 10 to 15 years of experience across AI, NLP, and products. Thank you so much for this enriching conversation, and I look forward to having more of these. I
No,
would love to
absolutely.
have deeper conversations about what is AGI, right?
Yeah.
But maybe another podcast for it. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. It was fabulous. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Anuj. As always, I've always enjoyed our discussions and, and thank you for having me. I've definitely enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.